in the case of 2 rugby players, but in the other, the person who had been accused went to court, filed or sued for defamation, and he won that case. That is Standard journalist Tony Mochama. And so we kind of delved a bit into this on Wednesday, looking at the law, but now we want to look at, in the era of Me Too, what sort of boundaries should exist between, especially people of the opposite sex, in the workplace, in public, even in private as well. What are your personal standards when it comes to dealing with people of the opposite sex? Let us know. 22422 is the SMS line. The hashtag is Daybreak. We get into that topic shortly. But as always, we need to tell you what's happening in the papers. And Trevor, where do we start?
I was wondering whether you introduce our guests first, but we'll just
it's Friday. It's Friday, man. Akili Melala. We have Arnold Maliba. I normally refer to him as a public policy analyst, but we need to remember.
Yes.
Secretary General. TNAP. He joins us today for the program.
TNA party.
Nothing changes.
Nothing changes. No, you're right. You're right. And I owe you that.
It's not right, because that then becomes the other party.
No, as in
TNAP.
One doesn't exist, one exists. So what is
your argument is that the other one is under Jubilee?
As in, if it does not exist, we are talking about what doesn't exist.
Arnold Maliba, Secretary General, TNAP.
Tabitha Mwangi also joins us. I hope she won't have a controversial response to us. Head of Security Program, CISA. Do you want to object?
No.
Okay.
All right.
Let's get into it. Okay, Trevor, what are we looking at?
Let's start with the front page of the Daily Nation. There's a corridors of disease. That's River Athi or Galana or Sabaki, depending on where you live, is one fine mess of pollution. It has created a host of health problems along its path that is killing by the thousands. That story continues on page 6, 12, and 13. And this is not part of the things we were supposed to talk about, but it's touching on almost everyone around here, from Nairobi to Thika to Makueni to Malindi. And people have been complaining about cholera, typhoid, and infections of the small intestines, and also issues to do with skin diseases and cancer.
One of our guests here lives near one of these locations.
Yeah, in fact,
confessed.
Where? Ondiri, she said. Is it Ondiri or which side?
Don't divulge her location. Somebody will come knocking.
And I'd like to hear your views on this. This wasn't part of the stories we were supposed to talk about, but this generally affects all of us. What needs to be done at this point? Is it the people? Because sometimes it's the people who lead this pollution. And then there are also those who say that the authorities should step in. What do you think is the easiest way to curb this sort of thing? Or is it too late now?
It's late, but not too late. As someone who lives near a water body, I think everyone has a part to play. The community that lives around there, and of course law enforcement and the government itself. And so I think the most important thing is for people to know the importance of these water bodies, the health implications that come with them. And then there should be implementation of legislation that makes sure that people that are not using this water properly, or people that dispose waste in ways that are not very good, are dealt with according to the law. And I think if it was up to me, there should be like the maximum punishment for some of these things, because as someone who lives in an area where we do a lot of farming, if you pollute that water, then it has implications on the food and so many other things. Yes.
Yeah. When you see a title like Corridor of Disease, you know, is there a part of you that now no longer gets shocked by the headlines that you see? Because I guess we live in a world where every day there's a new shocking headline, one, and two, sometimes, and scientists will usually say that correlation is not causation. You know, in the case of when you look at causes of cancer, scientists have still not been able to definitively prove that this leads to, not leads to, but is so directly linked with cancer. But they say this can cause, this might cause. When you look at a headline like this, do you want to dig deeper? Do you question sometimes, or are you more like, wow, this is bad, we're in a bad state?
As someone who lives in a place that's been mentioned, then it scares me. Yeah, it scares me, but then I think we've gotten to a point where nothing shocks us anymore. So sometimes I will read articles about what is happening in the country, and I am not sure whether to be happy, to be angry, to be sad, to just laugh about it. So I think we've just sort of become immune to some of these headlines, and I think that's a bad place to be as a country.
Arnold, where is the missing gap? Because it's not an issue of not having policies and laws regarding this. We are a country where one person says you're living on riparian land, the other one comes and says you're not living on riparian land. Everybody has their own definition of what is wrong and what is right. How can this be stopped?
I think largely it's a matter of political will, because it's not a matter of lack of mechanisms to address this. They do exist. Not a matter of lack of policy and legislation. It's largely a matter of enforcement. And that is a political issue. So if we get the political angle right, we sort this, because there are laws. You've realized that every time something happens, somehow somebody can actually pull up a policy somewhere, will pull up a law and tell you, this exists, but we've not worked on it. So the headline is not even sensational. It's a fact.
To you, you don't take it as sensational?
It's not sensational. It is real. We know it's actually a confirmation of what we already know. And whereas causation, correlation is not necessarily causation, but it invites us to a dialogue towards that end, to investigate that why are these happening within the same framework? Why is this environment bringing this up? So somehow, whereas you might not have empirical evidence, but we're not saying this doesn't have empirical evidence. It's actually, there is novel evidence and discussion around these issues that for quite a long time, and we've been around, the rivers, our water bodies have been mismanaged, just like all our natural resources, largely mismanaged. We don't have forests, and you know, we will argue about Mau. We have seen droughts, we have seen animals die.
Yeah. And now the 11 counties that are facing droughts.
So the same thing with the rivers. We have really managed our water systems badly. Nairobi is actually the biggest sin we have in the country, at least when it comes to environmental management, and nothing is done right. Like, for example, there are policies that govern how you do a construction, how you come up with anything. But I'll tell you that even the county government itself, when it's doing a construction, doesn't follow the laws. They will not do environmental impact assessment. Yeah. They will not go through the approvals that you as an individual, so they are above the law. Literally, we don't get things right, and we... In
fact, sometimes you hear that environmental impact assessment is being done post-approval of the project or during approval, and you wonder...
I think this, whatever is happening at the moment, is probably inviting us to have a candid discussion about it and decide. Like I said, it's a political decision we need to make. It's about political will. We have got the laws, we have the mechanisms, we know the effects. Yeah. But then the same way we elect thieves and still say they can change along the way is
the same way we go with this.
We get around with these things.
Speaking of making a difference, page 5 of the Daily Nation, which way Kenya? BBI retreats to write a report. As the Building Bridges Initiative team retreats to write its report after gathering views across the country, several big issues are expected to preoccupy the members. Politicians, pundits and experts opine that the structure of the executive will be a point of contention. Is there need for a prime minister's position or not? That question right there is where we begin. Because there's also the Punguza Mizigo initiative that is suggesting restructuring of the executive, giving the president a 7-year non-renewable term, cutting the MPs from 416 to about 100 and something, and also scrapping off nomination positions. Are these too many things at the same time? Tabitha, I'll start with you. Which one do you go with? And is there a need to expand, from where you stand as a Kenyan, is there a need to expand the executive? There's always this argument that it's not inclusive enough.
First of all, I wouldn't say where I stand, because I like to remain very...
apolitical.
Yes, I don't like talking about politics because of the work that I do, so that I am never told that, oh, you lean so much towards one side. But what I will say is, as a taxpayer who is tired of paying taxes every day and not seeing much of what that tax does, I am not in support of increasing the number of representatives that we have. In fact, if it was up to me, I will reduce the number. That does not mean that I support one or the other, but I have issues.
It's just your personal opinion.
Yeah, I have issues with increasing the number of representatives that we have, because I feel, for instance, the nominated positions can somewhat be done away with. Some of them. And when it comes to making sure that the structures that we have are representative enough, then there's ways of making sure that we have equal representation. So, for instance, we have the two-third majority
Gender
rule, which has never been enforced fully. We also have things like having special what are they called? Affirmative action positions for people, say from minorities, people living with disabilities, for instance, and all these special interest groups. So I don't think we should increase to make sure that it's more representative, because if we're not already being representative enough, then even having more people will just give an allowance for us to keep favoring the same people that we see being favored today.
Okay, Arnold Maliba, even as the BBI retreats to write their report, have they captured your views?
Well, they did invite me.
Represented?
I showed up, gave my input.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Okay.
At the Kenya National Theatre. Okay. Like very many other Kenyans who had an opportunity. Again, we are not able to have everybody show up and do this. But I would say that whereas BBI is something that we needed as a country, the process, not necessarily the name and everything around it, probably the way it came about was not agreeable to all of us. But then things are not always going to work the way we will be agreeable to all of us. So the BBI process is good, yes. The way they've done it, in other places, people wouldn't know that even sittings were happening. The way it was put up, there wasn't at least enough public participation to a level where you say it was quite open. A few people decided that it should happen that way. And sometimes a few people have decided for the good of a society. So we cannot entirely bastardize the process.
Sometimes a few people have decided for the good of the society.
Actually, most times.
I don't know why something just doesn't work well with me.
You know why I say that? Is because, you know, if you're going to do public participation, it's a process that we are still struggling with. It's in the Constitution, we should even have a citizen forum. We were unable to do that. Public participation laws have never entirely gone through Parliament. There has been a bill that has lived there forever. What we are using are guidelines that were set up by an advisory that came from court. So literally, the threshold does not exist. It might not be very exhaustive. But coming to the
what
issues,
sort of representation must you achieve to, must you...
So there is a guideline around that. So if I showed up with a list of a few people who wrote their names and signed against it, and then I can actually go to court and argue that based on the threshold we have, which is way too low, I at least engaged people, and then it's a conversation we are having continuously. So still there is that feeling that public participation is about government reaching out and not the people engaging government the other way. You know, but also if people are able to actually make it the other way around, so that they force this engagement, it will actually probably deepen this engagement process. Now, talking about the substance, is that I think we need to redefine what representation is. Because literally, we now have got over 50 communities, at least tribes. And our primary identification to representation is always about ethnicity. So we are, and it's not entirely a bad thing, because it's the process of identity. That our first port of call when it comes to representation, it's about somebody who looks like me, and normally it's about somebody who speaks my language. It has got its merits and demerits, and as we progress, because again, democracy is an evolving process, we might really just catch up. Now, if you look at what is actually being, I was talking about redefining what representation is because our aspect about representation, everybody wants to be represented. She talks about Article 27, the two-thirds principle. No one wants to talk about Article 100. It talks about mechanism being put in place for youth, women, persons with a disability, the minorities, and the marginalized. That aspect has not been dealt with. So after we have dealt with the two-thirds, we will still have Article 100 to contend with. Everybody wants representation. And to also be very honest, we need to actually also say that the media has actually sold us on this, is that the cost of running representation is not as high as it is said. I know we really, and everyone out there wants to protest and go out of place and say that the cost of, for example, in this financial year, Parliament is about 43 billion shillings. The whole Parliament and everything. In a budget of 3 trillion, we're talking about 43 billion shillings. It's not so much. Actually, for Parliament, it's actually the smallest. It's less than 3% of the entire budget.
Yeah, it's the focus.
Yes, so yet we put a lot of focus there. There's the executive, where a lot of money is going. All our taxes, literally, about 60% of what we ever pay for taxes ends up servicing the executive. And we never point a finger on that end. So if these numbers around here, of course, Parliament is bloated. You get around there and it looks like Parliament Secondary School. There are a lot of them. They even don't know each other. During lunchtime, they queue and there's a lot of noise. You will think you're in a secondary school. But still, if that is what we want as Kenyans, it is good to go. So, as BBI goes around there, I hope that there will be more avenues to involve a lot of more people coming in so that we have got this conversation. Because honestly, we must actually say that the Constitution 2010 is very expensive. We wanted it, we voted for it, but it's very, very expensive, and democracy is expensive. If we want it, we will have to pay it.
All right.
To pay for it.
You wanted to touch on the census, but now we're due for a break.
Why don't you take the break and come back?
All right. Let's talk about the census when we come back, and then we'll delve into that discussion about how far is too far. How do you create the boundaries? Are they subjective to every single person? So there are some people, it's easy for you to say hi to them, handshake. Others prefer hugs. So do you even ask them which one you prefer? Does it become awkward? What happens from there? And why is it so hard for employees to report fellow employees who have sexually harassed them? That is the discussion we're having next, but we'll also touch on the census in just a bit. We'd like to hear your views as well on 22422. Have you experienced it? What do you think are the solutions? What have you seen out there? Why is it so hard to report these cases? We're just having a conversation around this issue of sexual offenses and harassment as well. You can tweet at Citizen TV Kenya.
That's right. At Wahiga Mora, at Trevor Mbija, at Zinzi_K.
Yes. Hashtag Daybreak.
That's right.
Always. See you in just a bit.